The animus is the deposit, as it were, of all woman's ancestral experiences of man. Many modern women are possessed by an invisible man within them. He speaks through their mouths with rigid certainty, judges harshly through their eyes, and turns their natural warmth into cold intellectualism. He isn't a real man, but a psychological force, what Carl Jung called the animus, that can quietly hijack a woman's personality without her awareness. Tonight, we continue our exploration of Jung's revolutionary psychology by examining one of his most provocative insights: the negative animus, the repressed masculine archetype within women, and how it often manifests as the very qualities women most criticize in men. Building on our previous discussions of the shadow, projection, the curse of consciousness, the anima, prophetic dreams, the inflated ego, collective psychology, happiness-seeking, and spiritual experience, we now turn to a dimension of feminine psychology that speaks directly to contemporary gender dynamics. What you'll discover may fundamentally shift how you understand certain patterns in relationships between men and women. And by the end, you'll encounter Jung's most challenging revelation, a profound insight that offers an unexpected path toward psychological wholeness beyond gender conflicts. The Man Within, Understanding the Animus. To appreciate Jung's insights about the animus, we must first understand what he meant by this concept, a term often misunderstood or oversimplified in popular psychology. The animus is the contrasexual archetype in women, the masculine counterpart to the feminine anima in men that we explored in an earlier discussion. Just as the anima represents a man's inner image of femininity, shaped by both personal and collective sources, the animus represents a woman's inner image of masculinity, not just based on her experiences with actual men, but emerging from deeper collective patterns in the psyche. As Jung wrote in Ion, the animus corresponds to the paternal logos, just as the anima corresponds to the maternal eros. This statement doesn't reflect gender stereotypes, but describes archetypal principles. Logos representing the principle of reason, meaning, and judgment. Eros representing the principle of relatedness, connectivity, and evaluation through feeling. The animus isn't inherently negative. In its positive manifestation, it provides women with qualities traditionally associated with masculine consciousness: objective thinking, spiritual conviction, courage to act decisively, and capacity for self-assertion. It can function as an inner guide, creative muse, or spiritual mediator between the conscious personality and the deeper dimensions of the psyche. However, Jung observed that the animus frequently appears in a negative form, particularly in women who have had problematic relationships with men, or who have absorbed cultural patterns of gender antagonism. This negative animus becomes a harmful autonomous complex, a psychological pattern that operates outside conscious control, influencing thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in ways the woman herself might not recognize. Unlike the anima in men, which often appears as a single figure representing the man's conscious attitude toward the feminine, the animus typically manifests as multiple male figures representing different aspects of masculine energy, from primitive physical power to intellectual or spiritual authority. This multiplicity reflects the different dimensions of masculine principle in the collective unconscious. The negative animus often first forms through a woman's relationship with her father or other significant male figures in early life. If these relationships were marked by disappointment, rejection, abuse, or absence, the animus may develop primarily negative characteristics. However, cultural factors also strongly influence animus development. Societies that devalue women or create antagonistic gender dynamics foster negative animus formation regardless of individual family circumstances. What makes the negative animus particularly problematic is its covert operation. Unlike the shadow, which we may recognize in moments of self-awareness, the animus often completely possesses consciousness without the woman realizing it. As Jung noted in Aspects of the Feminine, when animus and anima meet, the animus draws his sword of power, and the anima ejects her poison of illusion and seduction. This possession by the negative animus creates distinctive psychological patterns that affect both the woman's relationship with herself and her interactions with others, particularly with men. In our next section, we'll explore how this possession manifests and why it often remains invisible to the woman experiencing it. But first, consider this question. Have you observed in yourself or women moments when the personality seems to dramatically shift into a more rigid, judgmental, or absolute mode, particularly when discussing men or masculine institutions? Possessed by judgment. How the negative animus manifests? How does negative animus possession manifest in a woman's psychology and behavior? Jung identified several distinctive patterns that reveal its influence, patterns that remain strikingly relevant in contemporary gender dynamics. The most common manifestation is what Jung called opinionatedness, rigid, absolute pronouncements delivered with unshakable certainty, often on subjects where the woman has limited direct knowledge or experience. Unlike genuine conviction based on careful consideration, animus opinions have a peculiar quality of being both incontestable and strangely impersonal, as if speaking through the woman rather than from her authentic self. As Jung wrote in the Archetypes and the collective unconscious, the animus does not appear as one person, but as a plurality of persons. He is apt to be contradictory and to change his opinions in the most bewildering manner. He may appear as anything from a brutal thug to an intellectual priest, a romantic poet to a petty schoolmaster. This multiplicity creates internally contradictory positions that nonetheless are each delivered with absolute certainty. A woman under animus possession might fiercely claim both that all generalizations about gender are wrong and that men always behave in problematic ways, seeing no contradiction because each statement emerges from a different animus figure rather than from integrated consciousness. What unites these seemingly contradictory positions is their absolutist quality and resistance to nuance or qualification. The second major manifestation is inappropriate critical judgment, particularly harsh, sweeping criticisms directed at men or masculine institutions. This isn't the same as legitimate critique based on thoughtful analysis. Animus criticism has a distinctive emotional tone, cold, cutting, and often disproportionate to the situation, as if expressing years of accumulated resentment through a single incident. Consider how a woman with an activated negative animus might respond to a small mistake by her partner. Instead of addressing the specific issue, she launches into a comprehensive indictment of his character. "You're just like all men, selfish, thoughtless, and incapable of real empathy." The criticism expands from a particular behavior to his entire personality, and then to men as a category, a pattern that reveals animus influence rather than authentic personal response. The third manifestation is what Jung called spiritual inflation, identification with abstract principles, intellectual systems, or moral positions that elevate the woman above ordinary human limitations. This isn't genuine spiritual development, but psychological compensation for feelings of devaluation or powerlessness. A woman possessed by this aspect of the animus might position herself as morally superior to others, particularly men, claim special insight into truth or justice, or adopt rigid ideological positions that admit no uncertainty or ambiguity. These positions provide a sense of power and authority, but disconnect her from authentic relationship with both herself and others. Finally, the negative animus often manifests as emotional disconnection, replacement of natural feeling responses with abstract intellectualism. Under animus influence, a woman might analyze situations that would normally evoke emotion, substituting concepts and theories for direct emotional engagement. As Jung observed in Aspects of the Feminine, the animus is rather like an assembly of professors who know everything all the time and are absolutely right. This professorial quality replaces authentic feminine consciousness, which naturally integrates thinking with feeling, abstract principles with concrete circumstances, with a parody of masculine intellectualism detached from lived experience. What makes these patterns particularly problematic is that they're largely unconscious. The woman experiencing animus possession typically believes she's expressing her authentic perspective rather than being influenced by an autonomous complex. The opinions, judgments, and positions feel entirely natural and justified from within the possession state, even though they may contradict her usual personality and values. This unconscious nature creates what Jung considered the central paradox of the negative animus. It often manifests as criticism of precisely the qualities it embodies. A woman possessed by the animus might harshly criticize men for being rigid, judgmental, emotionally distant, or domineering, while displaying those very qualities in her criticism. As Jung noted, no matter how friendly and obliging a woman's eros may be, no logic on earth can shake her if she is ridden by the animus. In our next section, we'll explore how cultural factors in modern society have intensified negative animus development, creating new patterns of manifestation. But first, consider this question. Have you experienced moments when your thinking, or that of women you know, shifts into absolute rigid certainty, particularly regarding men or gender issues. What might it reveal about the possible influence of the animus in these situations? The cultural animus. Collective patterns in modern society. Jung developed his understanding of the animus in the early and mid-20th century, but the psychological pattern he identified has evolved in fascinating ways within contemporary culture. Modern social conditions have created both new manifestations of the negative animus and intensified the collective patterns that foster its development. Several aspects of contemporary society particularly influence animus formation and expression. First, the rapid transformation of gender roles in recent generations has created unprecedented psychological challenges. While offering valuable opportunities for women's development, these changes have also disrupted traditional containers for masculine and feminine energy, creating confusion about how these principles might be integrated in both personal and collective psychology. As traditional gender roles dissolved without equally powerful new models emerging, many women have been left to develop their relationship with masculine energy without clear cultural guidance. This can intensify negative animus formation as the masculine principle becomes associated with uncertainty, conflict, or competition rather than complementary strength. Second, father absence, both physical and psychological, has increased dramatically in many societies. Jung recognized the crucial role fathers play in healthy animus development, providing young girls with positive experiences of masculine energy. When fathers are absent, abusive, or emotionally unavailable, the animus often develops primarily through negative experiences or cultural stereotypes rather than direct positive relationship. This pattern creates what Jungian analyst Marion Woodman calls father hunger, a deep longing for positive masculine presence and recognition. When unacknowledged, this hunger can transform into its opposite, unconscious resentment that energizes the negative animus and projects it onto men as a category. Third, media representation increasingly portrays antagonistic gender dynamics, with men frequently depicted as either incompetent, childish, or threatening, predatory. These polarized representations provide limited material for developing a nuanced inner image of masculinity, feeding negative animus formation with simplified cultural stereotypes. As Jung noted in the Archetypes and the collective unconscious, just as the anima becomes, through integration, the eros of consciousness, so the animus becomes the logos. But this integration requires balanced cultural representations of masculine energy, representations increasingly absent in contemporary media. Fourth, academic and political discourse sometimes elevates criticism of men or masculinity from legitimate analysis of specific problems to comprehensive condemnation of masculine energy itself. When absorbed uncritically, these perspectives can strengthen negative animus patterns by providing intellectual justification for antagonism toward the masculine principle. This doesn't invalidate important critiques of problematic male behavior or patriarchal systems. It suggests that when these critiques move from addressing specific issues to generalizing about masculine energy as inherently negative, they can intensify psychological patterns that ultimately harm women's own integration process. Finally, social media algorithms tend to amplify the most extreme adversarial content about gender, creating filter bubbles that reinforce negative animus patterns. Content expressing nuance or appreciation between genders typically generates less engagement than content emphasizing conflict, creating distorted perception of gender relations that feeds negative animus development. The contemporary manifestation of the negative animus often takes distinctly modern forms. Absolute certainty about complex social justice issues, rigid adherence to ideological frameworks regarding gender, or intellectual dismissal of entire categories of human experience that don't fit preferred narratives. These manifestations maintain the core psychological pattern Jung identified while adapting to current cultural conditions. Understanding these cultural dimensions doesn't minimize individual responsibility for psychological development. It recognizes that animus formation occurs within social contexts that can either support healthy integration or intensify negative patterns. As Jung consistently emphasized, psychological healing requires both personal work and awareness of the collective patterns that shape individual experience. In our next section, we'll explore Jung's understanding of how projection, the unconscious attribution of disowned psychological material onto others, amplifies negative animus patterns in relationships. But first, consider this question. How might contemporary cultural patterns be influencing animus development in ways that affect your own experience or relationships? What cultural messages about masculine energy might be contributing to collective animus patterns? Seeing the invisible man, animus projection in relationships. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Jung's animus theory is his understanding of how projection, the unconscious attribution of disowned psychological content onto others, creates destructive patterns in relationships between women and men. This dynamic reveals the startling truth behind our provocative title. Women often don't recognize that what they most dislike in men may actually be projections of their own animus. When a woman's relationship with her animus remains unconscious, this autonomous masculine complex doesn't simply influence her internal psychological life. It gets projected onto actual men in her environment, particularly intimate partners. This projection creates a double-bind situation. She is simultaneously attracted to men who can carry her animus projection, often men who embody qualities she hasn't developed in herself, and then disturbed or angered when these men display those very qualities. As Jung wrote in Ion, the projection-making factor is the animus, which is unconscious in women. When projected, it draws everything that belongs specifically to itself out of the unconscious and heaps it upon a masculine figure, with the result that the man thus chosen as a target becomes the devil himself. This projection process follows a predictable pattern. Initially, a woman may be attracted to a man precisely because he embodies qualities she unconsciously associates with masculine strength, decisiveness, rationality, assertiveness, or intellectual authority. These qualities resonate with her own undeveloped masculine potential, creating powerful attraction through psychological complementarity. However, as the relationship develops, these same qualities often become sources of conflict. What initially seemed like admirable strength may later be perceived as domination. What appeared as impressive rationality may later feel like emotional disconnection. What seemed like admirable confidence may later look like arrogance. This shift typically doesn't reflect changes in the man's behavior, but rather the progression of the projection process. The most revealing aspect of this dynamic is the emotional intensity it generates. When a woman reacts to a man's behavior with anger or criticism, dramatically disproportionate to the situation, it often indicates animus projection. The emotional charge comes not just from the current circumstance, but from the activation of the entire unconscious animus complex, including accumulated experiences and collective patterns related to masculine energy. Consider Sarah, who initially admired her partner Michael's decisive leadership and intellectual clarity. As their relationship progressed, she became increasingly critical of these same qualities, accusing him of being controlling and emotionally unavailable. While Michael certainly had flaws worthy of discussion, Sarah's criticism took on a peculiar quality: absolute, comprehensive, and resistant to any evidence that contradicted her negative assessment. In therapy, Sarah gradually recognized that her reactions to Michael weren't solely about his actual behavior, but were amplified by her projection of negative animus qualities. She had grown up with a father who used intellectual superiority to dominate family interactions, creating an animus pattern that initially attracted her to Michael's intelligence, but later transformed that attraction into antagonism. As she developed conscious relationship with her own internal masculine energy, claiming her own intellectual authority and decisiveness, rather than projecting these qualities onto Michael, her relationship dynamics dramatically improved. She could see Michael more clearly as an individual with both strengths and limitations, rather than as a screen for her animus projections. This pattern reveals the profound irony at the heart of Jung's animus theory. Women often most harshly criticize in men precisely the qualities they haven't consciously integrated within themselves. The woman who condemns men for being judgmental may not recognize the judgment in her condemnation. The woman who criticizes male emotional unavailability may not notice her own emotional disconnection when discussing gender issues. The woman who objects to male certainty may not see her own absolutism about gender politics. This insight doesn't invalidate legitimate critiques of problematic male behavior or patriarchal systems. It suggests that sustainable transformation of gender dynamics requires not just external social change, but internal psychological work. Developing conscious relationship with the masculine energies within, rather than projecting them in negative form onto men as a category. As Jung wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, if the encounter with the shadow is the apprentice piece in the individual's development, then that with the anima is the masterpiece. The same could be said about a woman's encounter with her animus. It represents advanced psychological work that transforms not just individual relationships, but one's entire orientation to masculine principles in both inner and outer reality. In our next section, we'll explore Jung's vision of animus integration, the path by which women can develop conscious relationship with their inner masculine, transforming antagonism into complementarity. But first, consider this question. Have you noticed patterns in your own relationships, or those of women you know, where similar qualities initially create attraction but later become sources of criticism or conflict? How might the projection process we've explored help explain these patterns? From possession to partnership, the path of animus integration. Despite the challenges presented by the negative animus, Jung's perspective wasn't pessimistic. He offered a clear vision for how women can transform unconscious animus possession into conscious relationship with masculine energy, a process that liberates both their authentic feminine consciousness and the positive aspects of their inner masculine. This integration process typically unfolds through several distinct stages, each presenting its own challenges and opportunities for growth. The first stage involves recognition, becoming aware of when the animus is operating, rather than authentic feminine consciousness. This awareness often begins through relationship feedback, when partners, friends, or therapists notice the distinctive shift in a woman's personality during animus possession. The characteristic signs, rigid certainty, cold intellectualism, disproportionate criticism, or sweeping judgments, become recognizable patterns rather than justified responses to external circumstances. For many women, this recognition comes as a profound shock. Having genuinely believed they were expressing their authentic perspective during animus episodes, they must confront the uncomfortable reality that an autonomous complex has been speaking through them without their awareness. This recognition often triggers shame or defensive resistance, making it the most difficult step in the integration process. As one woman described her moment of recognition, "I was in the middle of a lecture about how my husband never listened to me, when I suddenly heard myself, really heard the tone and absolutism in my voice. It was exactly like my father when he went on his political rants. I was stunned to realize I was doing precisely what I was accusing him of, not listening, just delivering judgments. It was humbling and frightening to see this force operating through me." The second stage involves conscious differentiation between the woman's authentic perspective and animus-driven content. This doesn't mean rejecting all judgments or opinions, but developing discernment about their psychological source. Questions like, is this my genuine response, or am I being influenced by my animus? And does this perspective include feeling and nuance, or is it absolute and cutting? Help establish this crucial differentiation. During this stage, women often discover that their authentic feminine consciousness naturally integrates thinking with feeling, principles with circumstances, and judgment with compassion, creating a balanced perspective, quite different from animus-driven opinions. This integration represents not weakness, but psychological sophistication beyond the either-or thinking characteristic of negative animus possession. The third stage focuses on direct relationship with animus figures through active imagination, dream work, creative expression, or other methods of engaging unconscious content. Rather than being unconsciously possessed by these figures, the woman learns to engage them as inner partners in psychological development. This engagement might involve dialoguing with animus figures that appear in dreams, journaling from multiple perspectives to distinguish animus voices from authentic consciousness, or working creatively with masculine imagery and symbols. These approaches gradually transform the animus from autonomous complex to accessible psychological resource. The fourth stage involves reclaiming projected animus qualities, recognizing when criticism of men actually reflects disowned aspects of the woman's own masculine potential. This reclamation doesn't mean accepting problematic male behavior, but distinguishing between legitimate concerns about specific actions and projections of the woman's own undeveloped masculine qualities. For example, a woman who harshly criticizes men for being emotionally unavailable might explore her own patterns of intellectual distancing when discussing charged topics. A woman who objects to male dominance might examine her own unexpressed needs for authority and influence. This exploration often reveals valuable masculine qualities, waiting to be consciously integrated rather than unconsciously projected. The final stage represents genuine animus integration, the emergence of what Jung called the inner marriage between feminine consciousness and masculine energy. This integration doesn't eliminate natural feminine qualities or replace them with masculine attributes. It creates a dynamic balance where masculine strengths complement feminine wisdom rather than opposing it. As Jung wrote in the Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, the integration of the animus is a problem of relationship, not one of identity. It is not a question of a woman becoming pseudo-masculine, but of establishing right relations with masculinity. This integrated relationship manifests as psychological wholeness that transcends gender polarization. The woman develops capacity for both emotional connection and clear thinking, both receptivity and assertion, both flexibility and principle, not as contradictory opposites, but as complementary aspects of complete humanity. For Jennifer, a writer who struggled with both creative blocks and difficult relationships with male editors, animus integration transformed both her work and professional connections. Through dream work and active imagination, she discovered multiple animus figures influencing her creative process. An inner critic whose impossible standards paralyzed her writing. An inner authority figure who dismissed feminine insight as lacking intellectual rigor. And a positive creative partner waiting to be consciously engaged. As she developed relationship with these figures rather than being unconsciously influenced by them, her writing found authentic voice that integrated intuitive wisdom with intellectual clarity. Her relationships with male colleagues improved dramatically as she withdrew projections and engaged them as individuals rather than screens for her Animus complex. Her work gained both deeper feeling and clearer structure, an integration of feminine and masculine qualities that transcended gender stereotypes while honoring the distinctive contributions of each energy. Beyond gender wars, the wholeness beyond masculine and feminine. We began with a provocative statement. Many modern women are possessed by an invisible man within them. We've explored Jung's understanding of the animus as contrasexual archetype, its negative manifestations in women's psychology, how cultural factors shape its development, and the projection patterns that create conflict in relationships between women and men. Now we arrive at Jung's most profound insight about gender psychology, one that transforms our understanding of both masculine and feminine principles. Jung's ultimate vision wasn't the victory of one gender principle over the other, nor even simple cooperation between separate masculine and feminine energies. He recognized that beneath apparent gender polarities lies a more fundamental psychological wholeness that transcends these distinctions while honoring their unique qualities. As he wrote in Mysterium Conjunctionis, the conjunctio oppositorum in the guise of Sol and Luna, Rex and Regina, is the essential feature and goal of the opus. It is a psychological symbol expressing the union of opposites, which plays such an important role in alchemy and constitutes its real purpose. This conjunctio, or union of opposites, represents not compromise between masculine and feminine principles, but their alchemical transformation into a higher integration that preserves their distinctive qualities within more comprehensive wholeness. This integration doesn't erase gender differences, but transcends gender antagonism by recognizing that masculine and feminine principles ultimately derive from the same source, the complete human psyche that contains all these potentials. From this perspective, the negative animus in women and the negative anima in men represent not just personal psychological problems, but collective manifestations of imbalance in our cultural relationship with these principles. The antagonism between genders reflects projected internal conflicts rather than inherent opposition between men and women as human beings. Jung's approach offers healing not through victory of feminine consciousness over masculine energy, or vice versa, but through conscious integration of both principles within individuals of any gender. This integration creates what we might call psychological androgyny, not the elimination of gender distinctions, but the conscious embodiment of both masculine and feminine qualities according to individual psychological needs rather than collective gender expectations. This perspective dramatically reframes contemporary gender discussions. Instead of positioning masculine and feminine principles as inherently opposed, with one needing to prevail over the other, it recognizes their profound interdependence and mutual necessity for complete human development. The goal becomes not defeating problematic masculinity, but integrating masculine energy consciously, not elevating femininity as inherently superior, but developing its wisdom in balance with masculine strengths. As Jung wrote in Aspects of the Feminine, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. This integration happens not primarily through external social change, though this has its place, but through internal psychological development that transforms our relationship with both masculine and feminine principles within our own psyches. This understanding offers unexpected liberation from gender conflict. The woman who consciously integrates her animus no longer needs to project negative masculine qualities onto men as a category. She can recognize both the shadows and strengths of masculine energy without being possessed by unconscious reactions to either. She can engage men as individuals rather than representatives of gender principles, seeing through both idealization and demonization to authentic human relationship. Similarly, the man who integrates his anima no longer needs to project his inner feminine onto women through either idealization or devaluation. He can relate to women as individuals rather than screens for his own disowned feminine qualities. This mutual withdrawal of projections creates the possibility for authentic relationship beyond the distortions of unconscious complexes. As you reflect on tonight's exploration of Jung's perspective on the animus, consider this final question. How might your understanding of gender dynamics, both within yourself and in relationship with others, change if you approached masculine and feminine principles not as opposed forces, but as complementary energies seeking integration? What possibilities might open if we recognized that what women often hate most in men and what men often fear most in women reflects not inherent gender antagonism, but the projection of our own unintegrated contrasexual archetypes? Remember Jung's core insight. The aspects of masculine energy that women most criticize often reflect their own unintegrated animus, just as the feminine qualities men most fear often reflect their unintegrated anima. The path beyond gender conflict lies not in victory of one principle over the other, but in conscious integration of both masculine and feminine energies within individuals of any gender, creating psychological wholeness that transcends the limitations of unconscious projection and possession. This integration doesn't eliminate the unique qualities and perspectives associated with different gender experiences. It creates the psychological foundation for authentic relationship with both internal contrasexual energies and external gender differences. Relationship based on conscious appreciation rather than unconscious projection. Complementarity rather than antagonism, and integration rather than opposition. What might change in your own life and relationships if you approach gender dynamics from this perspective of potential wholeness rather than inherent conflict? And how might this shift transform not just personal interactions, but our collective relationship with masculine and feminine principles in culture and society?